Hello everyone, welcome to the next installment of a series whose name I'm still workshopping, and today we'll be figuring out if I can beat Mass Effect without using guns. If you've never played the Mass Effect games before, they're third-person shooter RPGs where you can command your squad mates and use various abilities that you level up along the way. The first game in particular showers you in guns, forcing you to micromanage your crew throughout the whole game to make sure their kits are optimized. We'll be taking that bit of faff out of the game though, since this will be a powers-only run. Now, to be clear, it's not possible to play entirely gunless, since your squad mates do come equipped with their own guns and will shoot at enemies, as one would usually hope that their comrades at arms would. For the purposes of the playthrough, we will have to allow them to shoot things, though luckily their effectiveness is pretty minimal since they're not exactly particularly skilled. But we'll also be equipping them with nothing but their starting weapons, and ideally their pistols specifically, as much as I can be bothered to remember to change them. With that out of the way, let's get into it. To start out with, we pick the Sentinel class, since it gives us access to both biotic and tech abilities, which are each effective against one type of enemy, and gives us overall pretty solid coverage. This also grants us access to what I suspect will be the best weaponless class in the second game, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've also chosen to be female Shepard to set up for other things in the second game that should be obvious to any true fans of the series. This next part is the most crucial, and if you try this yourself, I definitely recommend doing it. We set our squad mates not to use their abilities at all. They have to be activated manually by us, the player. In fact, I'd recommend this even for a casual playthrough, since our squad mates have a tendency to attack passing space butterflies with their best abilities, leaving them on cooldown for when you need them the most. Once we get into the game, we land on Eden Prime to recover the Prothean Beacon, and right away it seems like this run should be pretty doable. Our abilities deal decent damage, and Shepard's melee attack is honestly surprisingly effective, if not particularly accurate. One thing I noticed is that Kaidan's combat effectiveness is slightly higher than I'd anticipated. Not poor Jenkins though, that guy couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag. But I'm sure this will drop off in time as I refuse to give him better weapons. Anyway, we make our way through this mission without any major issues, pick up Ashley, who's going right in the bin as soon as I get another squad mate, and activate the Peyote Beacon. We wake up after our bad trip, only to find out that we need to go to the Citadel to meet up with Udina, who is somehow humanity's most important ambassador. Seriously though, who thought this guy would be a good choice to represent humanity? He's not the most personable. While we're searching for evidence that will help us take down Saren, we coincidentally run into 3 of our 4 remaining squad mates along the way, who all immediately agree to help us on our quest. Sweet. During this time we start to see the limitations of the run, namely our cooldown timers. While each ability is on its own individual timer in this game, the cooldowns can be ridiculously long, which means we spend a lot of time farting around behind cover waiting for them to come back. We add Tali to our active team, which means we'll be rolling with her and Kaidan for now. Once we get Tali, we can end this section of the game, wrapping up our business on the Citadel and heading out into space while the game opens up for the first time. We have 3 options, but the trip we'll be taking first is to Ferrum to find Liara, who will round out our combat squad for the rest of the game. Any companions with combat abilities, so Ashley, Rex, and Garrus, are completely useless to us, since a portion of what they do is always going to be dedicated to guns, which, as you know, we aren't using. We're rolling with the specialists in tech and biotics respectively, because they have access to abilities that the hybrid classes don't, and will also provide us with the most balanced team we can get. There might be some utility for Kaidan at some point, since he can help us triple up on certain abilities, but to be honest, I also just think he's boring, and so we'll be leaving him on the ship whenever we can. We land on Ferrum and finally get our first chance to pilot the best feeling vehicle in all of gaming, the Mako. We can't use its guns, since that's against our rules, but running over enemies in it is always hilarious. We drive around for a bit, kill some enemies, and then come up against our greatest foe yet, complete and utter tedium. This fight against the Geth Armature took 12 minutes. I don't know how much I'll be speeding it up in the footage, but it's going to be real fast. It has so much health, its shields regenerate, and so we're dedicated to chipping it down with the little bit of direct health damage our abilities do. Although it was in the spirit of the run, since we're anti-gun, I might have appreciated a little bit if Kaidan here had decided to shoot anything besides the crate I was taking cover against. Luckily for us, the Armature seemed to be operating on about the same level as Kaidan and just sat there also ineffectually attacking the crate. Maybe we're missing something here. What's in the crate? If this is how long it took to take down a completely immobile enemy, there are some fights that crop up later in the game that have me a bit worried. Oh well, that's a later problem. For now though, we just keep fighting our way across the planet where we find the final member of our team, Liara. After we rescue her from her self-imprisonment, we take out the ambush with the Krogan shockingly easily, which is interesting because I seem to remember that fight being a pain in the ass. It could be that previously I was trying to play conservatively with my powers and didn't desperation span them all at one single enemy, but this is something to monitor either way. I'd also like to take a moment here and say that even though this particular fight was a relatively smooth first try, that doesn't mean we aren't dying. In fact, we're dying probably slightly more often than we normally would on a typical playthrough, but most of the deaths just aren't noteworthy. When I say we're getting by with minimal troubles, the odd death here or there is just standard to me not being very good at video games, and not a roadblock worth mentioning as part of the run. Just file that away so we can remember that me not always talking about dying isn't an indicator that the run is necessarily super easy at that point or anything. With Liara rescued, we now head from Farum to Fair-Os, which I must say is a wild coincidence how close those two names are. We choose Fair-Os because I'm still deathly afraid of what lies in wait for us on Noveria, and I want to be as leveled up as possible for when we get there. Our mission on Fair-Os is to determine why this human colony is under attack, and also to do our best to help to break the siege. To this end, we run around killing Geth with our abilities and Shepard's still shockingly effective fists. Shockingly effective, that is, until we run into our first major roadblock of the run, Krogans. Now, I mentioned just a minute ago that the Krogan fight back when we were rescuing Liara was surprisingly easy, and that was just because I have some vague memories of dying in that fight back when I first played this game in like 2010, and seeing what I did here, I'm even more shocked that it went smoothly. There's a fight on the way to take out an optional beacon, which honestly I would have skipped, but I was lost and didn't even realize it would lead me to a dead end, where we have to fight several Krogans all at once. The problem is, Krogans regenerate their health at a pace that far outstrips our ability cooldowns and are absolutely relentless in rushing us and murdering our teammates, often before they can even fire off their abilities once they've been revived. What this means is if we can't kill a Krogan straight up before it reaches us, the fight is a lost cause. It is currently doable so long as we fire off all of our abilities at once, but it takes several tries, and I have the sinking feeling that this is going to be a recurring problem. Also, after we slowly punch out the beacon, the air where it used to be is still transmitting some sort of signal. Weird. Luckily, the rest of the enemies in the area are nice, easy to kill Geth, and we make it to the next main section of Fair-Os, the Skyway, where we can get back behind the wheel and drive right past a bunch of enemies. Or over, depending on if you want to move slightly out of your way or not. We disembark the Mako with no difficulties, since you'd pretty much have to sit still and let the enemies take potshots at you to have any real difficulty in one of these sections, and then we take out the Geth in front of us. We came across another Geth armature, and I was all primed to brag about how it wasn't that hard in the enclosed space, and we punched it to death, but then it killed us in one hit. More embarrassing is the fact that not only is this armature in the dead end room optional, but we haven't hit an autosave since the beginning of the Mako section and have to trek our way all the way back over here. Nothing particularly awful, but still a huge pain in the ass for a completely avoidable death. Advice to anyone playing this game, save frequently because it seems like so far they didn't update the autosave points. If memory serves, the first game had a quick save button on PC when it originally launched, which might explain how bafflingly far apart some of these autosaves are, but either way, this game saves jarringly infrequently compared to most modern games. Also worth noting is you should absolutely check your brightness settings in this game, at least on the PS4 version, since I was having a rough time seeing things until I realized the HDR brightness settings defaulted to something completely whack. Anyways, finally back in the game, we come across a fight that reminds us Krogans are still tough, though as we gain more abilities we're a bit better equipped to deal with them, with the real challenge of this fight coming after when we try to walk past the dead enemies to loot a locker and are blocked by some debris. We have to wait until Singularity recharges to move them out of the way and let us by, since Shepard hasn't learned how to vault over waist-high obstacles yet. Along the way, we learn that the Geth are after the Thorian, an ancient telepathic creature capable of controlling minds. We're offered a humane way to subdue the mind-controlled colonists, but we refuse and just beat them to death instead because we don't believe in using weapons. It is done with grenades, which aren't technically guns, but I honestly forgot they were mapped to the square button and couldn't figure out how to use them earlier in the game, so we'll just continue not using them. It's been so long since I played that I forgot all the guns operate on a cooldown system with no reloading, so assuming that the square button was for reloads, I never used any grenades except once by accident. Until I went to write this part and chucked a bunch around mashing buttons, that is. So we murder as many colonists as we come across, alongside some Thorian creepers, which are essentially plant zombies, who are both easier and tougher to fight than normal enemies. They bum rush us, which means it's quite convenient to smack them all in the face as they run up, but we also sometimes get left without powers available and can't just hide behind a box and wait for them to recharge, since the enemies are constantly getting in our face. This is probably the highlight of the run so far, since their combat style is presenting us with a challenge more interesting than hiding and waiting for cooldowns to finish. Then comes the boss fight with the Thorian, which provides us with a few revelations. First, as some of you probably expected, this is validating Singularity as absolutely the MVP power of the run. It can immobilize multiple enemies at once and even outright kill them in certain conditions, and is one of the main reasons Liara is a no-brainer pick for our team. Second, our squad mage damage actually hasn't fallen off as much as I would have expected. I was curious if this would happen, since lots of games scale NPC companions to the challenge you're facing, but I was expecting this game not to on account of you having to micromanage your party's equipment. It would take some experimenting that I'm way too lazy to do, but it's looking like that's something it's very feasible to just skip over even when you're playing this game casually. Third, and perhaps most importantly, is that this fight is super tedious without guns. We have to pistol whip all the Thorian nodes to death because they aren't vulnerable to power damage, and this takes an absolute eternity. Luckily for us, they're all conveniently within Shepard's reach, or else we have to take the L on the entire run. Somewhere in all this, we take out the Thorian and head back to the ship, ready for our next mission. Next up is Noveria, where we're off to deal with Matriarch Benezia, and it's off to a rip-roaring start. We can't get a pass to take the Mako out until we either impress or get rid of the boss of the station, which means a lot of tedious running around and taking elevators, with only one easy fight mixed in to keep things interesting. Once we're outside, we have the most fun it's possible to have in the Mako, jumping over shit. I don't think I've ever done this before actually, since the Mako's guns typically make short work of these barriers, but honestly boosting over them is way more fun. After a couple minutes of driving around, we get inside the research station where we learn that Krogan can absolutely still take us out pretty easily if we aren't prepared. After killing a few deaths and proceeding deeper into the station, we have our first encounter with the Rachni, who present a pretty unique challenge for us. They do incredible damage and can absolutely overwhelm us if we let them get close, but they're also pretty stupid and easy to kite around and can always be taken out with a little patience. We fight some more Geth and run into this interesting glitch where Shepard can't turn around for some reason. Doesn't stop us from winning the fight though. We then agree to help the surviving humans at the station, but promptly forget about that and accidentally walk through the door to progress onwards, making them angry and forcing us to kill them all. Whoops. I honestly didn't mean to do this, but it fits the general Renegade style we've been playing with so far, so we'll just roll with it. Now comes the fight I've been dreading all game, Matriarch Benezia, who we actually managed to kill first try without too much difficulty. I remember having so much trouble with this fight back when I originally played the game, and I actually once died fighting her and ended up all the way back in the Mako due to the game's poor autosaves. That actually seems to have been fixed here, unlike on Pharos, since the game autosaved both at the beginning and partway through the fight. But I'm really at a loss for how this went so easily. I suppose the obvious answer is that I was terrible at video games when I was younger, but maybe the abilities in this game are just more powerful than I gave them credit for. Either way, we take down Benezia and move on to what is sure to be a meaningful and impactful choice in the long run, whether or not to kill the Rachni. And here's where I fully disagree with the choice at hand, since the Paragon move, ostensibly the nice person thing to do, is to unleash a Rachni Queen capable of reviving a deadly alien race upon an unsuspecting galaxy. We need Renegade points for the next mission though, so we gas her and move on to Virmire. If you notice that I spent a lot less time on this mission than the previous one, it's that we had a lot less trouble. As we level up and gain access to new abilities, we have more stuff to throw at our enemies, and we didn't really run into any particularly difficult challenges here, so there was less to talk about. Next we land on Virmire, where our first objective is to drive past stuff and deactivate some AA guns. This goes off without much of a hitch, and next we have to talk down Rex, which is exactly why we were chasing those extra Renegade points. Basically, the Krogan have been genetically neutered by the Salarians and have a super low fertility rate. Saren has figured out how to clone Krogan, which Rex sees as an opportunity to apply towards saving his people. Seems understandable, except we have designs on blowing up the facility. Now, saving Rex is actually completely non-essential to this playthrough since we aren't using him and he's not an available teammate in any of the subsequent games, but I like the guy, and the scene of Ashley shooting him really isn't one that I want to watch today. After resolving our issues using words, we listen to Captain Kirahi's quite rousing speech and go off to fight our way into Saren's lab. There we meet Sovereign, the Reaper who's using Saren as a puppet in order to facilitate their invasion of the galaxy. It's a pretty standard villain meeting, everyone exchanges threats, and we go about our way. It's also worth noting that at this point, Geth drones are actually somehow one of the most annoying enemies to fight, since they're immune to a lot of our biotic powers. We set the bomb and come up against quite an intense challenge in a Krogan warlord. This guy has an absolutely insane amount of health, and if we don't focus on him first, he bull rushes the squad and takes us all out with ease. After a couple of full starts, we manage to take him out and come face to face with Saren, where we unavoidably shoot our gun at him in a cutscene, failing the run. Now, I don't actually consider this a failure, since it's not due to an action that we take as the player, but I figured I'd mention it before someone comes for me in the comments. The ensuing fight against Saren is pretty tough, but we can cheese the beginning part of it by hiding behind the elevator we just came up for most of the fight. Saren himself won't come around that side, so we can pick off all of his Geth support that try to flush us out before we emerge and take him on ourselves. Next we have to make what seems like it should be the biggest choice of the run, whether to save Kaidan or Ashley. This feels like it really should be agonizing, the game forcing us to pick between two of our squad mates, leaving one to die. But it just isn't. Kaidan and Ashley are the two blandest members of the crew, and choosing between them is like picking between two different loaves of white bread. That's not even mentioning the fact that they have a super minimal impact on the sequels, likely owing to the fact that the game has to presume that either one could be dead, so they can't have too much impact. Ultimately, it's okay though, since I'd be a lot more upset if I had to choose between leaving Garrus and Tali behind, so maybe it's for the best that the choice is between the two losers. Mini rant over, we choose to abandon Ashley because there are save files in existence where she's killed Rex, and therefore, she's a monster. Back on the Normandy, before we can proceed with our next mission, the Council summons us to the Citadel and proceeds to ground our ship because we've just been too effective for them to allow us to continue working. We take out our frustrations on an innocent reporter, which I'm amazed she gets up from, considering what we've been doing to the Geth with that punch all game, and then Anderson follows in our pugilistic footsteps and clocks Udina to get us free. Once we are free, we make it to Ilos incident-free, where we finally caught up with Saren. Our increased power is very noticeable at this point, since we're able to take down 2 Geth armatures at once in a fraction of the time it took us to kill 1 at the beginning of the game. The only other noteworthy fight on Ilos is against this Geth Prime, who I was prepared to say was one of the toughest encounters of the run so far, until I realized it was completely my own fault I struggled, when I noticed that there are 4 armatures that you can activate to help you with the battle. I'll have to remember that one for next time. We then talk to a Prothean computer who tells us that the conduit Saren's been looking for is actually a tiny mass relay into the Citadel, which will allow him to invade it from within. We climactically give chase, only to run into the very reason why I bag on the Mako so much. We get flipped, and it takes ages to get ourselves righted, killing any sense of flow we had. After finally finding ourselves right side up, we make it through the relay into the Citadel, where we're ready for the final mission of the game. The lead up to Saren doesn't have too much of note, besides the fact that melee attacks are extremely satisfying to land in low gravity, and how ridiculously difficult these turrets are, though luckily we can just sprint past them. Which we do because we're in a rush to save the galaxy, not because we're scared. This finally puts us up against Saren, and this fight is a doozy. While he floats around his platform, he's immune to biotics, and he has a large number of adds in the fight, on top of having just a crap ton of health. Things get pretty dicey a couple times, but we eventually manage to get him whittled down and onto Phase 2. Phase 2 is easier, but also somehow harder, as he can now be taken out of commission for a few seconds using Lift, but he has such an absolutely ridiculous amount of health this fight takes us a full 15 minutes to beat, even topping the armature from the beginning of the game with our full suite of fully upgraded powers. Luckily, for the sake of my sanity, we do manage to get this done on the first try and land the final blow on Saren, winning the run and proving once and for all that you can beat Mass Effect without using guns. Well, that one was a lot of fun, though to be honest, it did get a lot easier than I anticipated for some stretches of the middle game. At least the final boss wasn't a pushover. Still, there were some interesting things that popped up, and the big takeaway here is that you absolutely cannot underestimate biotic and tech powers in Mass Effect 1. If you enjoyed this and would like to see more stuff like it, make sure to do all the things that tell YouTube you liked it, and maybe comment below if you have an idea for another run in this or another game. Oh, and I do also have a Patreon, so if you'd like to help fund getting me a better microphone, consider joining that. See you next time.